differently than ever before. And we're doing everything we can to just draw people in. Probably one of the big game changers that's going to occur is we've worked out a collaboration with Fowler's PSLA. And we're working on it right now. Frank knows more about it than me, but where we're actually going to attempt to bring on 5 or 10 of those individuals from Fowler who have already indicated they want to be police officers and bring them on the department. Here's our struggle is, unlike other departments, other jobs, we lose them from 18 to 21. You can't take the test until you're 20 and a half so that you're 21 when you get on. So between 18, you said you want to be a police officer, and we lose touch with you until you're 20 and a half. But in this particular case, we're trying to fix that by bringing them on the department, giving them an actual job where they're doing a function, not just sitting around doing intern stuff, but actually learning the police department, learning the paperwork, learning things, doing physical fitness stuff, so that by the time they reach that 20 and a half, they take the civil service test and they're already kind of part of our department, and we bring them on. You're gonna automatically.
Are those paid?
They would be paid.
Positions?
Yep. You're going to automatically have, they're all going to be city residents, obviously, and they're going to be very diverse as well, coming out of an apartment. If we get this conduit in place, you will see 5 or 10 of these individuals, again, city residents, diverse, coming out of an apartment every single year. So that's going to be a game changer.
And we're in the process of developing that right now?
Yes, we are.
Is it just with Fowler or with other high schools as well?
We're starting it with Fowler because they have the program specifically around public safety, but we would absolutely like to expand it. We're applying for some state dollars to support this, but the chiefs are also committed to putting it into next year's operating budget, and we have some other partnerships in the community, but we think this is a significant recruitment tool.
That's great. It's really good to hear. How do we check for residency? Will we be dipping back in to make sure that as we get these 5-year commitments that people are honoring them and that we're going to be checking in? What does that look like?
We will. So we manage that the same way as we will manage that the same way we manage it for any city employee who has a residency requirement. There's an affirmation on an annual basis where we lay out the requirement and the employee attests that they are meeting the requirement. We tend to do a reactive investigation if there's a complaint, and there are complaints that are received. They come to the mayor's office, they come to human resources, they sometimes come through the city auditor's office, occasionally they come through the council. And we have a procedure in human resources for those to be investigated and the proof that is then requested. So we do that reactively rather than proactively.
Do you have any idea how many investigations there have been in all city employees over the last basically 2 years?
I don't know how many have been done in the last 2 years. I can tell you in the 7 or 8 months that I've been here, we have probably done upwards of 16 or 17.
When there is discovered to be fraudulent address, how does that disciplinarily typically handled?
So if we agree that the individual is not a resident of the city, they haven't been able to provide proof, we give them a 30-day letter. They can cure the problem in 30 days.
How many, this probably be one of my last questions, but with the, I forget the phrase, where's the package, but in trying to incentivize people to step up for sergeants in higher roles, do we have numbers for how many are applying now, where we want to go? Are we missing our targets? What are our targets? You know what I mean? Like how short are we falling, and where do we hope to be?
Sure, and here's what we're falling down on. Not only numbers, not only quantity, but quality. Some of our best folks that would be the best sergeants, the best lieutenants, the best captains, that we know would lead people, and you really need people in those strategic positions, are no longer taking the tests or not taking the tests. I don't have numbers in front of you, but it is. I can say that it is this. It's both a quantity thing and a quality thing, and I think this will incentivize both. But we can find that number for you. We have seen. Yeah, it'd be good to know. A downturn in people taking the test. Yep.
I think it makes sense. It's good to hear that there was good conversation and good dialogue between the city and the force to work this out. Well, I think that's it for my questions. I would just say to any officers that are listening or watching that Rosetta Stone does actually work miracles. If they want to get that 3.5, Rosetta Stone is a good way to get that Spanish fluent.
Puis-je aller à la toilette?
Oui.
Okay. All I remember.
Councilor Red.
All right, I got some questions. I got a comment though on the 700 versus 350 intake as a troubling number. I don't know if it's a troubling number because I could probably go to a deep fried Oreo stand at the state fair and offer free deep fried Oreos and get a couple hundred people to apply who probably wouldn't be great cops. So the number I'm less concerned with than the number of city residents and people of color who we're actually hiring. And I don't know how much that has changed. I would guess it probably hasn't changed much, and the number is far too low to begin with. So I would say the benchmark for judgment of recruiting should be that, and not just the intake number. From there, I'm going to kind of go through the items again. So you have the wages. So am I fair in characterizing these? So we're going from January 1, 2018 to June 30th, 2022. So 4.5 years. So am I, over that period, it's a 10.94% pay raise? Does that seem right? If you do 2.5 times.
Sure.
So then
if you did the math, you're probably going to be compounding be a little bit higher than that.
So then, like, if you were dividing by 4.5 years, you're at like a little under 2.5% per year on average.
Correct.
Okay. And then you gave this 12 million over the lifetime of the agreement number. So for just the wages increase, what's your estimate for the change in dollars?
Probably, I'm doing the math in my head right now, Counselor, which is always dangerous, but probably somewhere between 75 and 80% of that number would be the salary.
So you said 12 million nominal.
Yeah, I'm looking at, off the top of my head, the numbers I'm looking at in front of me are probably somewhere between 8.5 in wages as they compound throughout the life of the contract.
Because we're at 800 for 2018, 800,000 for 2018, 1.4 for 2019. So it's probably like 2 something for 2020.
It's just south of
3,
2 in 2020.
4.
And then I don't have 21 and 22.
Okay. If you can give me the numbers by year,
Okay.
and you can show me the wages. I think wages are the easiest to estimate.
No question the wages are the easiest.
So that would be the one and it's the bulk of it. So
Yep, absolutely.
clarity on those would be good.
Sure. Yep. Health insurance contribution, as Corey mentioned, we had hoped to get more of a sliding scale on that. That'll be about a net $100,000 back to the city.
So health insurance, you may have said this and I might not have heard it properly, but you have the couple bullets. So it says health care contributions for current members shall increase $15 per month for single coverage, that one. And then below it you say all members hired following the date of this contract pay 15% annual premium. So what's the percentage for the bullet above, the people who are already in?
I think the family was about 8 or 9.
Yeah.
So they're at like 8 or 9.
8 or 9 right now, and I think the single was maybe 12 to 14%, I think. I mean, it was a little bit
I'm
closer to
looking-
the 15%, but 3/4 of our
Looking at Donna and Margaret if they.
3/4 of our force have the family coverage, so.
Yeah.
So the
Is that,
new hires,
Under, and about 9%, and yeah, I think it was about 13%.
okay,
Okay.
so 13%, so those numbers would reflect 13% of the premium equivalent for single and 9% for family coverage.
The concern is that they're fixed
Right,
as opposed to sliding through the life of the contract.
right.
all the new members will constantly pay 15%.
That's
So
correct.
instead of when it gets more expensive, the percentage goes down.
That's
This will
correct.
stay.
It's a shared.
But it also locks, it says retirees will lock in at their current rate. So that means all the guys who are going to go out, who are already in, are going to be locked in at the 8, 9, 13, whatever they're at now, right?
Well, if they retire before the contract is approved, but once the new rates go in, if they retire at that point, then they would pay.
But I mean, this says, this doesn't push the current members up to 15% forever.
No, it doesn't, but it
does not.
increases
Right.
the 15 and 30, so to 115 and 230 per month.
So
for
what does
current
that, if you're
members.
going from, if you're at 9 and 13 now, what does it become?
Not
By the end
It's
of the,
not-
it's
Significantly
small.
higher.
All right.
Here it will go down.
Yeah, fine.
Right, which is why we want to get to a percentage.
Right. So it's like a good change for the city in the long run, but a
Yes.
good deal for the people who are in the system and going to go out now also. Okay.
Rank differential is somewhere just depending on the percentage of folks that actually take advantage of it and the number of tests that are taken and accepted into rank. Somewhere, we're estimating it somewhere just south of $1 million.
If you can give me the breakdown of that math, like the number of people who you expect
Sure.
to get the increment, that would be helpful. The sick leave, this one's harder. What do you estimate for the dollar value here? And for instance, right now, you give the descriptions, and I know, for instance, where it says sick days shall be reduced to, I know the framework is more different. Like you were saying, oh, it was roughly 25 before, depending, because I know there's like nuances to.
We took that out of the financial model. It was virtually
You
impossible.
just couldn't do it.
It's just impossible to estimate. Education, language, military incentive, somewhere just south of $500,000 a year.
So, I know one thing we had talked about was this overtime delay from sick leave. So that's not in here at all, right? Like, I
Well-
know you do this sick leave, you do the weekend thing.
If you look at the last bullet,
If a member calls in sick and cannot produce a doctor's note, they'll be ineligible for voluntary OT for a period of 24 hours.
24 hours.
Right.
Okay.
and then the last item that has a dollar value, no, I beg your pardon, there's two more. Longevity, somewhere around $500,000 a year. Again, depending on what percentage of eligible officers take advantage of it. And then the final item that we assigned in the financial model, Counselor, was the number 11, the comp time off the wheel.
You didn't do 7? Wait, what, the longevity in the model?
Yeah, that's the one, that's about $500,000.
Oh, that's $500,000.
Yep, it's about $500,000, again, depending on how many officers take advantage of it. And candidly, we may have slightly underestimated that one if the anecdotal evidence, I think we've all, in the last couple of weeks, talked to officers who intend to take advantage of that. So that may be a higher percentage than we expected, which would be a good problem to have. And then item 11, comp time off the wheel, about $80,000.
When all these changes happen, the budget goes up.
The budget goes up significantly.
So what does the overtime code, how do we think about adjusting that in all of this?
So we think that there's a couple things, both items in the contract and the fact that we are working really hard to install an electronic timekeeping and scheduling system that has kicked off. That project has kicked off. The county is working really closely with us to accelerate that project. And we think that that's going to help us significantly control overtime expenses.
What do you anticipate being the timeline for the implementation of this electronic timekeeping?
Do you want me to tell you the safe number or the number that I pray for every night?
Both.
I am absolutely convinced we can have it in place by late fall of next year. Ideally, I would like to see it midsummer. Right now, it's moving very quickly, but we're going to hit a bump in the road. We just don't know where it is yet.
I think that's most of mine. But
Did, Counselor, did Jesse Cases send you his financial model?
did he?
Yeah.
Not unless he did since I got here.
Okay, no, okay. I'll make sure that you get that. That will give you the ability to look into the assumptions that we made and the numbers that we used.
Just on, I guess on the timekeeping, How will that help control overtime?
Well, right now, scheduling happens on a very manual basis, so there's a tendency to overestimate both the need and occasionally the use, honestly, of overtime. It's done manually. It's done on a series of paper tickets that are cumbersome to organize, maintain, and track. And so we think that the scheduling software, electronic scheduling and electronic timekeeping, is going to help the force significantly. And in every model case that we've looked at for other forces, there's been a substantial, I don't want to use the word significant, but a measurable reduction in overtime.
So is it fair to say that the managers within the police department don't have the data to optimize their staffing, so they err on the side of, I don't want to say overstaffing, but of calling in, and then there's not an immediate feedback loop to adjust, or like how?
It is not a data-driven process. I don't want to say that it's not. I don't want to say that there's a huge number of errors in it, but it is significant enough to have an impact on overtime expense because it's not data-driven, and it requires multiple layers of interpretation and approval, whereas the new system will have the logic built into it. That's actually the most difficult part of implementing the system, is working with the chiefs and their leadership teams to build the logic behind a request for overtime. For example, is a particular officer eligible for a particular shift of overtime? Takes a considerable amount of thinking and manual work right now, whereas once we build the logic into the system, that officer requests a voluntary overtime shift, the system knows whether or not he or she is eligible and can send it directly for approval to a supervisor if they are eligible. It happens much faster as well. So you're looking at a significant savings of man hours.
Hey, can I just so I just wanted to mention the Kronos program is going to be great. It has a lot of options. But the ultimate goal, the only way we're going to bring down overtime is numbers. The mayor's been very good about allowing us to hire. Chief Buckner's got this class that we're about to swear in very soon. We have one graduating, one we're going to swear in, and the mayor's given us permission for one back-to-back. Just like I mentioned before, when I came on in the 80s, we had gone through a drought where we were way below our numbers, so we started putting 2 classes on a year. The mayor's given us permission to do that, at least this year. When we put those on, 70 more officers, that's how you drive overtime down. The bulk of our overtime right now, the overtime that's not compensated by the dome or something else, is minimum staffing. Putting officers on the street so that it's not only safe for them, but so that we can keep up with the call load. And I'm talking about uniformed patrol officers driving around the cars. And there's still, when we put those numbers on, we're still not doing very much proactivity, meaning work that where we're not just chasing a call, going call to call to call. And it's you folks that get the calls for those type of things, where someone waits 3 hours or it's quality of life call and no one ever shows up. That's the stuff we need to get to, and you're only going to do it with numbers. So it's going to not only fix that, but it's going to drive down the overtime. And the answer to Councilor Driscoll's, I just checked with Brian Lutz. Now, he's not at his desk, but he has a very good grasp of things. He said we're at 48% of our budgeted overtime right now. This is fiscal year. Typically, we're usually at 55 or 57% of our budgeted overtime at this time for the year. So we are down a little below our budget. But again, the only way we drive that down ultimately and consistently and for the long term is get numbers back in there. Chief Buckner has a model which includes 80% patrol, 20% other, and that's very important as well. We have other divisions that do a tremendous amount of work, SID, community policing, all these other divisions within our department, traffic, they do an important role, but there's nothing more important than patrol, the uniformed officers taking the calls. That's where we need to put focus. And Chief Buckner, again, has indicated he wants to go with an 80%, 20% split, meaning every time we graduate in an academy, 80% of the folks are going to go to patrol, 20% will go to those other divisions, and we'll get those numbers up.
And obviously, we appreciate the council's support in adding those new classes in the past and understanding. And obviously, as we head towards looking at the upcoming budget, we hope that, that the council will continue to be supportive of bringing on new classes.
Yes.
I just say that's the first time I've ever heard any department person proactively present, we spent 40% of our budget by this time of year, this time compared to 56% of our budget last time. Almost never do people actually provide both. Like, so that's great. It's great that you're thinking,
Yeah.
like talking about it that way.
Yeah. Well, you really need a gauge. There's no sense in just throwing numbers out without a gauge of what you had last year.
Well, people have certainly thrown numbers out in the past, so that's good. On the overtime. So you're saying, I realize most overtime is for, I hope for patrol and all of that. But then if you were to look at the top 10 overtime earners or the top 20, would they be people working patrol?
And so I'd have to look. In some cases, they would be. In some cases, they'd be individuals that work everything they can get their hands on, whether it's Dome, Destiny Mall, but they're all overtime jobs, and they're not all jobs that where we aren't reimbursed. But I'd have to look at that list. And Counselor, I just want to mention too. I mentioned minimum staffing, which is where the bulk of our overtime comes from. But I mean, you just use as an example the last couple of days or the last few weeks. We've now implemented extra patrols at Destiny Mall. Things come up all the time in our business where we can't control them, we can't predict them, and we put resources toward them, and it translates into overtime. The tragic incident we had last night, numerous people came in from the homicide squad to take care of that event, and they were necessary, every one of them, but they all came in, the bulk of them on overtime, because we don't have that many people working during that time frame, especially our experts that need to be there when we have a critical incident like that. So it's just unpredictable things like that. But I can look at that list, to be honest, and I bet you're going to find officers that work an array of overtime jobs, including minimum staffing. And again, to answer your question, I think what you're getting at, this officer may not be a patrol officer. He may be CID, SID, but he's working minimum staffing in patrol or at the mall or up the Dome and an array of different things.
And I don't know how the new system will make it, but I know I've seen foiled timesheets for high OT working officers, and the level of detail is very low. So you basically see, oh, they worked 12 hours, 15 hours. Like, it's just numbers, and there's nothing else.
You'll have a lot more to foil.
Just really curious, does Destiny, I know some other entities that we work with, they contribute to have increased enforcement in their, for example, some housing developments that sort of pay extra to have extra enforcement because they use more of the police force. Does Destiny provide any additional funding to the city for their extra usage?
There's been an ongoing detail out there, which was actually present when that event occurred. But the extra patrols that we just recently implemented because of that incident, the city's going to incur that cost unless we negotiate something with them. But they do pay for a detail.
Does
there.
Destiny pay for a detail out there?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I was curious about.
Yep,
Thank you.
they do.
Okay. I just
I know you can wrap it up, but I'll just say I went back and I watched the September 10th or 11th meeting where Councilor Green and I at least voted against the contract. And I know the two things I harped on were residency and the wheel. Residency certainly seems like a major victory. I didn't even think you would do that. That's great. So good job there. I always assumed we would end up paying more. I think they did a number of things to make it better for the city, for new people coming in, and it's easier to adjust it for the people who are coming in. And then I recognize that you've given for the guys who are there to make the compromise, so that all seems fairly reasonable. And then the wheel, I sort of agree with Councilor Green that it's probably a number that's so high that we're unlikely to have this pilot anytime soon, but I even appreciate the spirit of it, and maybe that's something we as a city need to, because I actually think the wheel could affect the number of people who we need. So it might be if you had a different wheel, you wouldn't need 450. So it's like it's kind of a funny requirement in that sense, but I at least appreciate that you acknowledge it, and maybe there's more we have to do to prepare ourselves to really have that conversation. And I'm excited to run with this payroll stuff, because I think that will help everybody involved. I think it will also increase the transparency of a lot of things, including overtime, to help people feel better about the money that we're spending. Thank you, Councilor Thompson.
And I would just like to say before closing as well that Councilor Green's point about perhaps doing, being that we're not officers and we're not involved in the operations of everything, knowing from a third party that this is the ideal number of officers that we should be at, I think would make us a lot more confident in all our decision making. Whenever you're on council and you're making decisions, typically you have one expert who thinks one thing and one expert who thinks another thing, and it's hard to know exactly where the balance lies. But I think we've been supportive of pushing new classes through. We hear from the people in the communities that they want to see proactive policing. So we've been cooperative, but it would definitely make things easier to be confident in our decision making if we had something like that to analyze what other cities do, what their staffing is, in coordination with the wheel.
And if I could just give a cheeky one, I hope that Gino Turo, in his role at PSLA at Fowler, will give the economics lesson of how overtime works and how it helps you get a pension and all of that when he teaches, because I really think it'll help recruitment with those kids. They'll be like, oh, this is a great job. Like, he can explain probably better than anybody the base pay versus the reality pay. I think that's great. I think he should go for it. He should explain it well. Those kids are going to be pumped up to be cops.
Well, I'm glad you gave me 1 minute to finish with. I want to thank everybody who was involved with the negotiations. I would say that you should have, Councilor Rudd, you should have a conversation with Chief Cecil here about the intake numbers, because those are very important. When those numbers shrink to the numbers they are now, when you probably lose 50 or 60% of the people that show up on the first mailing, that means that you're working with 100 and so people to try and put a class of 30 some on. I also would suggest that while overtime is down a little bit this year, but is pretty consistent, as the chief has mentioned, this is driven largely by the staffing, and that our staffing today is no different. It's actually lower than it was a couple of years ago. So while we, as the council, supported the 465 number, I believe it was, the number now is probably about 300 and something, isn't it?
Staffing?
Yes.
It's 403, but that includes 32
Of new recruits that are not useful to the police department at this time. So these numbers have to be taken into account, I believe, as Councilor Green mentioned there, when a study is done. I do support a study. I think IACP should do a study, or the state should do a study. The police department in the past has done their own study. I know at that time it probably would be wise to look at the beaten RAs, and we have some experts out here that understand this also, to take a look at the beaten RAs and where the deployment should be at that time. So in conclusion, I want to thank you all. It must have been a real negotiation, because the PBA voted for it, and the administration's very, very happy with the way it came out. So thank you for your time. Thank you, councilors.
Nice work, Frank.